Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, as the Northeast and a lot of the nation was under some record heat as summer arrived on Thursday. There won't be much cooling off, especially when it comes to yours truly doing what I love to deliver all of the latest and greatest in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as last Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And the theme to begin this podcast takes us back to a couple of weeks ago, maybe even last Monday, on the podcast where the Celtics were about to embark on their 18th banner. And no, I'm not going to get into the Celtics, but we were talking about the postseasons in both the NBA and NHL and how the National Hockey League was about to have their Game 5 the following night, which was this past Tuesday, as the Florida Panthers had a 3-1 series lead going back to Sunrise to see if they could finally put a cap to the NHL postseason. It would have been less than banner when you think about how the postseasons have gone in both the NBA and NHL. But here we are. Now that a week has elapsed and 2 other games in the books, including a game on Friday night, to where it is all set up. And I don't care what kind of fan you are. I don't care if you're a dyed-in-the-wool fan. If you are, that's a must-watch. That goes without saying. If you're a good sports fan, you still have to tune in. A casual sports fan, even if you don't know where Edmonton is on the map, and even if you just discovered that Florida had a hockey team and obviously been under a rock the last 30 years, considering that the Tampa Bay Lightning had won a couple of back-to-back championships just a few years ago. But if you didn't know that the Florida Panthers were in existence, then now you have awoken from a Rip Van Winkle slumber. And for even the casual sports fan, there is nothing else going on tonight. There is nothing else really to watch unless you are just a dyed-in-the-wool baseball fan where you have to watch what's going on the diamond tonight. And it's a very soft schedule. There is nothing else to interfere in the sports world with what's going to happen in Sunrise, Florida tonight. And that game, there is no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it, is a historic game no matter who wins or loses, especially if Edmonton wins, as we know, and we'll get to that in a second. But even if the Panthers win in a rout, going up to 8 p.m. tonight, ESPN, ABC, that is a game of historic and epic proportions. No matter how you slice it, this is a game that the sports fans should be zeroed in on and dialed in on tonight. Because even if you don't know the rules of hockey, even if you've never watched a hockey game, that game is important. Not only just for a Stanley Cup championship, as we know, but something that we have not seen in 82 years. Something that rarely happens. And I get it when it comes to the world of sports. We saw it last year where the Celtics were down 0-3 in the conference final. And as we know, no team in NBA history has come back from an 0-3 deficit. The Celtics met the challenge where they had a Game 7 in their building after being down 3-0. And we know what happened there. The Miami Heat went on to win and go to an NBA final. And then even of recent vintage, in the 2020 season, I get it, it was during the pandemic. But if you recall, in the ALCS, the Tampa Bay Rays got off to a 3-0 series lead. And of course, we have seen it in baseball, the 2004 Red Sox coming from behind against the Yankees, as we all know. But I'm just taking it from a more recent picture where teams have been down 0-3. And in this particular case, for baseball, it was a championship series to go to a World Series. And the Astros came all the way back before losing a Game 7 to Tampa. And then, of course, they went on to a World Series before losing to the Dodgers. So now that I painted that picture, and granted that hockey is a niche sport, it's a sport that you either love and maybe really like, but for somewhere in between, a lot of people are just going to dismiss it. But because of the historic proportions and because of what is at stake, and because this is something that we have not seen, especially in the NHL for now 8+ decades, you have to watch this game tonight. Because you have the invisible superstar on one end who has come back from the dead and brought his team back to this point, although in Game 6 didn't really do too much, but we know what happened in Games 4 and 5 where he had 4 points in each game. And of course, that person is Connor McDavid. And then the Panthers, who were in this setting last year, Stanley Cup Final. And even though they lost in 5 games and they pretty much steamrolled through this postseason, granted they had to sweat a little against the Rangers. They were down 2-1 before winning the next 3 games in that series. But for Florida and everything that has transpired here over the last 2 postseasons, and it looked like they were going to cruise to having that big trophy, the best trophy in all of sports, being raised above their heads in the one Alexander Barkov, the captain of the team. And because they lost games 4, 5, and 6, now all the pressure is squarely on them to bring home this championship in front of their home crowd. And I understand that may not be an arena or even a crowd similar to Hockeytown, USA, formerly known as the Joe, because they moved into that new Little Caesars arena. So I don't know if it has the same feeling or just the same overall when you got back in those days when the Detroit Red Wings were winning Stanley Cups there in the 90s and even in the early 2000s and even in the latter part of 2000. I don't know if it has that same panache. I don't know if it has that same feeling of knowing that when you walk into that building, they already have an advantage with that home crowd. Florida, I get it, in the last 2 years, they have ratcheted it up as far as them being a fan base that it's not going to rival any of the original Sixes, but they're going to have to be in full force in order for them to try to will that team to bring home a Stanley Cup. And all of the different storylines coming into this. Yes, we know about the 3-0 series lead that the Florida Panthers had, and that Edmonton has come back now from an 0-3 deficit. We know the superstars on Edmonton. We know Florida and their recent run here over the last 2 years. All of it. And now, as I get into Game 6, before I even talk about Game 7, Edmonton, we know that that was a frenzy, just crazy atmosphere. From outside the building in that little area where all the fans were parked outside watching it on the big screen to the denizens inside the building who were rooting for Edmonton to not only wanting the cup, but to have one more game. And right out of the gate, the Oilers scored where Warren Fogle had the opening goal, 1-0 at the end of 1. And then just literally seconds into the second period, you had the Oilers get the second goal, which I thought was going to be huge for them because not only did they need to play from in front, but they did not want Florida to breathe at all in this final home game for the Edmonton Oilers this year. And as it was, the Oilers were able to get that second goal to make it 2-0 by Adam Henrique. And then literally a dozen seconds later, Alexander Barkov cuts the deficit in half. But because of a video replay, which was good for the coach Chris Knobloch, the play was offsides, nullifying the goal. So the crowd as well as the Oilers could breathe a little bit because that would have been a big goal if it would have counted. Because then the momentum would have been on Florida's side. Who knows how much wind they would have had in their sails to kind of get that equalizing goal or equalizer goal. And as it was, the Oilers just continued to pile on. They got the third goal. They led 3-0 before Barkov did get a goal there in the early part of the third. And then throughout the rest of the period, although they had a couple of chances, but nothing really that jumped out on the screen as far as, oh, that could have been a 3-2 score, or that would have been another opportunity for Florida as they had a flurry in their offensive zone. You didn't really see that there throughout the course of the third period. And then with about less than 4 minutes to go, the Oilers tacked on a couple of empty netters pretty much back-to-back, I guess separated between 9 or 10 seconds. They win 5-1. Edmonton, the crowd, they're playing La Bamba at the end of the game. And now they force a Game 7, as I mentioned, back in Sunrise tonight. And I don't want to hear it from the sports fan. And I get it. If hockey isn't your sport, if hockey isn't your thing, totally understand. But because it is a sporting event, and a big one at that, not only is it for all the marbles, but for everything that I just detailed here over the last 7 or 8 minutes. And with the star power that the Edmonton Oilers have, and with Florida knowing that the pressure is going to mount when the puck drops there a little bit after 8 p.m. tonight. And this is what I want to talk about in reference to this game. I mentioned this on my YouTube channel. I put a couple of shorts there on Saturday after Game 6. Let the game rest there for a little bit. But I talked about why the reason that Edmonton, I'll start with them because they're the road team, why they need, I shouldn't say need, I said why they have to win the Stanley Cup now. They were down 0-3. They came all the way back. They didn't come this far only to come this far. They have to seal the deal. You would think that because you've come back from the dead and everybody pretty much wrote you off, and now that you're at this point with the game's best player, and granted, this is a team that has a lot of mojo and certainly has a lot of confidence and momentum going into this game. But as I've said throughout the course of this postseason, and if you haven't listened to the podcast prior to this, shame on you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so for those watching on YouTube. But this is a Jekyll and Hyde team. We don't know which Edmonton Oilers team is going to rise up here. Is it going to be the team that's really going to take this to the next level, a la Game 7 in Vancouver when they won that game on the road in the conference semifinals? Or are they going to be a team that Florida's going to come flying out of the gate with the home crowd behind them, and next thing you know, in a blink of an eye, it's 2-0, and they have to go uphill the rest of the way? Yes, they may scratch and claw, they may get a goal or two, but is it going to be enough for them to hoist that cup when it's all said and done? And this is the reason why they have to win. You do not come all the way back from an 0-3 deficit only to fall short. And granted, it's on the road, and I understand that all the pressure is going to be on Florida based on everything that I've talked about. But that's the reason why. But then the flip side of that, here's the reason why Florida has to win the cup. They were up 3-0. No team since the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs, when they beat the Red Wings, when they were down 0-3 and they came all the way back to win, has not won a Stanley Cup in that scenario. And for all that has happened, as I mentioned, the past two postseasons, their run last year going to a cup final, their run this year getting to a Game 7 of this cup final. And it doesn't matter. If they win this game in 20 overtimes, they will have the biggest piano off their back. They could truly exhale. But right now, you have to wonder whether or not they're tight. You haven't seen Sam Bennett. I know Makachuk had a good Game 5, but he's pretty much been invisible in Games 4 and also Game 6. Carter Verhaeghe, where have you been? A lot of their top players, other than Alexander Barkov, have been pretty much in vacation mode. And you have to wonder whether or not the head coach, Paul Maurice, is going to be able to reel them in to say, hey guys, we got one more game. It's in our building. And let's just go back to playing Florida Panther hockey. Forechecking, suffocating defense, not letting Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, who although had a big assist there on Friday night, but has not had a goal in the series. And for them to go out and play that style that has led them all the way to, let's say, Game 4, because obviously from 4 through 6, they've been a no-show, although competitive in Game 5. But this is it. One more game for all the marbles. And this is the reason why they have to win, knowing that it's in their building. They want to avoid history. And that's all else I can put into it. Because if they were to lose this game, they will be a statistic. They will be forever remembered as a team that blew a 3-0 series lead. And obviously 1942 was a long time ago. I don't know how many people alive even, they didn't watch the game, that was before TV, but even knew about the game or was around to at least witness the game. So it's all right in front of both of these teams. And how I look at this game tonight, I'm tired of predicting the series. I thought the Panthers on Friday night were going to be able to win the game because something told me that even with Edmonton playing well in Games 4 and 5 and bringing it back to Alberta and everything they talked about, we got to drag the Panthers back to Alberta. I just thought maybe it was going to be a little bit too much for them to not only just win the game, but also Florida knowing that, let's put this to rest now. We don't want to go back home and play a Game 7. I thought the Panthers were going to have enough resolve to win that game there on Friday night, but obviously they did not. And I wonder whether or not the goal that was disallowed by Barkov, maybe that took a lot of air out of their balloon, because then they weren't able to get that next goal to cut the deficit in half to at least be within a goal. Maybe if it's later in the second period or at least going into the third period. They were down 3-0, and yes, although Barkov scored, but they didn't really have a lot of threats there in that final period. Yeah, they had a couple of shots, but nothing to the point where Stuart Skinner, the goaltender of Edmonton, had to stand on his head. So, again, I'm tired of picking to me, how I look at this game tonight, cut and dry. It's either the Panthers are going to win in a rout, or Edmonton's going to just win by the hairs of their chinny chin chin. And that could be the same for Florida. I could see that. I'd be absolutely shocked if Edmonton blows out Florida in this game. That I cannot see. And that would be an ultimate, forget about shock. I'd be astonished if that happens. But how I look at it, yes, can Florida win a 3-2 game where Edmonton has to pull their goalie and they're scrambling to get the game-tying goal and then they come up short? I could see that. But something tells me this is going to be either Edmonton jumping out again, as we've seen here, scoring the first goal, maybe going up 2-0, Panthers chip away, 3-2, then it's 4-3, and they're hanging on for dear life, similar to what you saw in Game 5 before Edmonton got that empty netter to ice the game there and bring it back to Alberta. But how I look at it here, it's either going to be the Panthers 5-1, 6-1, or it's going to be Edmonton 4-3 or maybe 5-3 with an empty netter. That's how I look at it. And yes, maybe the Panthers will eke out a 3-2 game or 4-3, whatever it may be. But how I'm basing this Game 7 tonight, it's going to be Panthers in a rout or Edmonton squeaking by. And that's all there is to it. I'm not going to get into specifics. They've gotten this far. We could talk about how the Panthers are going to have that one more game left in them. But what happened in the last 3 games? Did they take Edmonton for granted, thinking that, oh, they were going to get off the deck, as you saw there in Game 4 where they won 8-1? So this is a fascinating game on so many levels tonight because of everything that I've detailed. And I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. As everybody, if you've listened throughout the last couple of weeks, I thought that the Panthers were going to win in 5. So, and to think, they were certainly on their way to doing so, because they won those first 3 games. All right, they lost the Game 4 in their building, and they were going back to Sunrise. You figured they would have popped the champagne and the coronation would have begun, but obviously they've put that on ice for the next 6 days, and here we are with a Game 7 tonight. And you know Gary Bettman, for everything that I've discussed throughout this postseason, whether it's Adam Silver and knowing that the conference finals had very little to zero drama, considering that the Celtics swept the Pacers and the Dallas Mavericks beat the T-Wolves in 5. And then we saw what happened in the final where the Celtics won in 5 and they were up 3-0. Whereas in the NHL, your conference semis, or excuse me, your conference finals, all right, you had an interesting Florida and Ranger conference final, but we know that the Panthers pretty much took control of that series after the Rangers went up 2-1. Where the Panthers won in 6, and then Edmonton-Dallas, pretty much the same thing, where the Oilers won in 6 games. So now you have a scenario where the NHL, in its biggest game, on its biggest stage, for the big silver chalice, what is it, 33 pounds, where you have a team and their young superstar, who all he needs on his resume is to hoist that trophy over his shoulders tonight. The game's best player, generational player. He has stolen the mantle and that hardware from the Sidney Crosbys and Alexander Ovechkins of the world. And right now, he is 60 minutes away from showing the world that not only is he the game's best player, but now could pretty much, he could retire after, he could lose the cup tonight. But let's say if he wins tonight and somehow, some way wins the Conn Smythe Trophy for playoff MVP, he can retire and he'll go right into the Hall of Fame. Or a team that's looking for its first Stanley Cup in 30 years and has come close last year and looked like they were going to just breeze by the Oilers here in this final. And they are also 60 minutes away in their building to celebrate to see whether or not they will be Stanley Cup champions. I don't know what else to say about this game tonight, people. I really don't. And I'm rooting for Edmonton. I've talked about it before. You have to wonder how the Panthers are feeling today. I'm sure they're going to try to be as loose as possible, but the pressure is squarely on them. I think Edmonton, even despite the fact they've come back from 0-3, and like I said, they have to seal the deal. You don't come this far to come this far. So there is some pressure on them to win. But all the pressure, as we all know, just from everything over the last 82 years, we haven't seen a team squander a 3-0 series lead to where they can end up losing the cup in their building tonight. And I tell you, I can't paint the picture any more perfectly for you guys and gals. That is a must watch. You have to watch this game tonight because I'm hoping that it's a close game. I know Gary Bettman and company, they are probably just up in arms, ecstatic The oatmeal and their chai lattes are going down smoothly this morning. Now, they do not want a blowout in this game tonight, even though I mentioned about Panthers maybe blowing out the Oilers tonight. They want it to where it's 2-2 going into the third period, and hopefully it's a one-goal deficit because they want a huge rating. And I'm not a big ratings guy, considering everybody streams these games on their tablets, phones, etc. But I would think for the NHL to get a good rating, and this isn't much by any stretch, but if they get 5 million at least tonight, and anywhere between 5 to 10 million, and let's say if they even topped off at 10 million, that it is 2-2, third period, back and forth, and at its peak was 10 million, and maybe overall was 7.5, that would be not a home run. That would be a grand slam for the NHL. Because let's say if they got a 10 rating, which is a little bit over 10 million people watching, and especially here in the States where, like I mentioned at the top, they couldn't pick Edmonton out of a map with a magnifying glass, a GPS, and an old-fashioned road map. And Florida Panthers, they're thinking, wait, Tampa Bay Lightning? What about them? Nope. Florida Panthers are not in a lot of people's consciousness when it comes to the National Hockey League. So if they were to get 10 million tonight people to watch, to me, that would be like the Super Bowl and people watching over 100 million people. Now, of course, you can't compare the NHL to the NFL, but that is just my comparison. If, by chance, this game is close, this game is close late, and people, for whatever reason, they're drawn to the back and forth, if it's that way, or just a defensive prowess by Florida, or the free-wheeling, free-skating Edmonton Oilers and how they've been able to get opportunities and chances, but they've been stonewalled by Sergei Bobrovsky, who even to his own teammates said it's not all his fault, and I get that. Bobrovsky, we've talked about him in the past, and it's not about him right now. We'll see how he does tonight because his legacy is going to fall on his shoulders tonight, whether or not he takes home that Stanley Cup or not. And that obviously will unpack more on Thursday. Definitely check the YouTube channel for an instant reaction tonight. Now, if it's a blowout, or maybe I'll still have an instant reaction regardless because it is a Game 7 and the historical nature of this game. But check out my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ for updates as we move it along, especially late tonight into tomorrow, as I'll get a full assessment, full deep dive on this game, and I hope you guys and gals out there watch it as well. And also one other thing, which does not bode well to the Florida Panthers. And think about this. Over the last 15 years, dating back to 2009, there have been 3 Game 7s. 2009, 2011, and 2019. Those 3 instances, Game 7, Stanley Cup Final, were won by the road teams. Pittsburgh and Detroit, and that was a home series where all the home teams won, and then Pittsburgh broke through, winning at the old Joe Louis Arena. 2 years later, same deal. Vancouver-Boston, where Vancouver went up to love. Bruins came back to win those 2 games. Vancouver went up at home 3-2, went back to Boston, tied 3, and then went to Vancouver, and what happened? Same deal. And then in 2019, the St. Louis Blues, where they were down 3-2 in the series, or maybe they would have been up 3-2 now that I think about it. But still, it wasn't a home series until Game 7, but they did win a Game 7 in Boston to win a Stanley Cup. So I don't know if that's going to bode well for the Panthers tonight. Obviously, there's a scenario where you could flip that coin and say, well, now that streak needs to be broken if you're a Panther fan or live in the southeast region of Florida. But another interesting tidbit to add more to the hype, to add more to the intensity, to the drama, to the intrigue of tonight's game. And one more time, I cannot wait for it to take place, ESPN ABC tonight. So that's what we have with the hockey as we move it along. Before I get to the NBA, we already talked about everything with the Celtics as we know, but you have some interesting developments there when it comes to a new coach, worst kept secret as we know, as well as the draft, which is something that the NBA is experimenting with 2 days. It's not just a one night as we've seen in the past, trying to take a page out of the NFL. It's not going to work. I'll get to that a little bit later. I want to turn my attention to baseball as I get into the batter's box with my bat and dig into at the leadoff spot there, dig into that batter's box. For Major League Baseball, had a very interesting weekend. A lot went on, a lot had transpired. And I'll start with the game there on Thursday night. We talked about the game at Rickwood Field Birmingham, Alabama, in light of the passing of Willie Mays, which they did a tremendous job. Now, I didn't watch every pitch. I didn't watch every inning. But yeah, love the old uniforms. You love when you watch the game, you see the Fox box with the score, innings, etc., the old style scoreboard, which I loved. And that's a stadium that has been refurbished, of course, where the Giants and Cardinals played. I get it. They're two old National League franchises, which you like, and you knew the Giants were going to be in the game considering Willie Mays. And even though if he was alive, granted 2 days prior to is when he passed, and we talked about his legacy and everything that Willie Mays meant to the game there on Thursday's podcast. Or if you missed that, definitely check that out. Also on YouTube as well. But for the game itself, nothing to write home about. But all of the pomp and circumstance, the tribute to the Negro Leagues, as I mentioned, Reggie Jackson with his poignant experience of what took place there throughout the early part of his career before coming up with the Oakland A's, and the racism and everything that permeated in that country during a time of the civil rights movement, a little bit after that, and everything that Reggie had to endure, which was excellent television. And I'm sure that that was captivating. I saw it a lot on social media where it was reposted through a lot of people's accounts, obviously Major League Baseball and other outlets who put that on there, and rightfully so. And like I said, the game wasn't much to sneeze at. They're not two teams that are going to be competing when it comes to the National League as far as a potential World Series, or in this case, a Championship League Series scenario. But for that game, and maybe they'll do something like that down the line. We've seen that in the past with the Field of Dreams game a few years back with the Yankees and White Sox, and then they had the Cubs and Reds play that game. Now, again, because of everything that has transpired here over the last several months with the statistics from the Negro Leagues being integrated with the Major League Baseball records and having this game being played there on June 20th, is this going to be a thing where we'll see more games like that down the road? I think they should. It should be an annual game. Why not? You want to continue to put forth the legacy of the Negro players and the Negro Leagues, and also have that be their day each and every year from now until the end of time. I'm all for it. They should do it. Baseball, they need as much attention as they possibly can get, considering it's a 20th century sport. I get it that there are a lot of people that still watch baseball, like baseball, play baseball, etc., but certainly does not have the same appeal as it did back in the 20th century. Forget about even the early part of that century, but we look at, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the All-Star games when it really mattered, but of course, Interleague had destroyed that, and the game has taken on a different shape since 1997, now with the interleague play from that time to today. And obviously you have every series, there's an interleague series. So a lot of the allure of the All-Star game is certainly far in our rearview mirrors when it comes to baseball fans. But I think that's a game that they should have every year. And yes, you saw that there on Thursday. And of course the tribute to Willie Mays as well on top of all that, which I thought Major League Baseball did an excellent job. Now, as far as the weekend goes, I have a lot of different themes here. And I'm going to start off with the AL East because you had a scenario when we last met. The Yankees and Orioles had split the first two games of their series to where the Orioles spanked the Yankees in the rubber game 17-5. They took the Yankees to the back of the woodshed where it was one of those games where it just got out of hand early, and therefore, and also late too. They were down 7-0 in the blink of an eye in the second inning, and then they tacked on more runs later on, and it made you think and wonder, wow, the Orioles beating the Yankees 5 of 7 matchups so far this year. They'll meet down in Camden Yards, I believe, the weekend right before the All-Star break, or at least that week leading into the All-Star break. So that's a series that everybody's going to have their radar up to watch. But for the Orioles then to leave town and go to Houston to play the Astros, who have been scuffling throughout this whole season, and then the Yankees having the Braves come to town, where Chris Sale had a great game, pretty much taking himself back to his days with the White Sox and those early days with the Red Sox, pitching well, bunch of strikeouts. Now, they had a big lead early where you had Ozzie Albies and Austin Riley taking, I believe it was Luis Hill was on the mound that game. So they took him to task as he came back crashing down to earth. And for the Braves to then take 2 out of 3, the Yankees did get the middle game before yesterday. Max Fried shutting down that Yankee offense. And then, of course, the Yankees, now all these injuries are starting to crop up. We see Aaron Judge come back after getting hit in the hand by a pitch there last Tuesday. Came back in the lineup there on Thursday. Hit a home run in Saturday's game. 28 home runs to lead the major leagues. But for now, Giancarlo Stanton, he'll be out for at least 4 weeks with a hamstring. We know about Anthony Rizzo, who's going to be out there with, I believe, a broken elbow. 8 weeks for him. So they traded for JD Davis, the former Met, from the Oakland A's as reinforcements because he can play some first base and maybe DH to be that right-handed bat to kind of supplement with Stanton's absence here over the next month. And the Yankees, as we all know, they're trying to get themselves back on the beam here, considering they've lost their last 4 series. Well, they lost 4 of the last 5, excuse me. They've lost their last 3 series because they lost to the Dodgers 2 weeks ago. Yes, they beat the Royals 3 out of 4, but since then they lost to the Red Sox. Then they lost to the Orioles, as we mentioned, and then obviously the Braves here to where they are 3-7 in their last 10 games. And you got to wonder, they've now lost to some high-profile opponents here in recent memory. And yes, their record, they're still atop the AL East. They do have 3 games that they owe to the Orioles because the Orioles have 3 games in hand to the Yankees. But for the Yanks, as we've seen here now, they have not fared well against top-flight opponents. Is that alarming? Is that going to make you raise your antenna there? Maybe to a certain extent. We'll see how the rest of the schedule plays out. They do have to play the Phillies down in Philadelphia at the end of next month, so that's going to be another series that will be on everybody's radar at that time. But the Yankees now hit a little bit of a pothole, and you got to wonder whether or not against these big opponents, whether or not they can hang with them. Now, of course, we could say that, yes, they could, but their record against this recent stretch here shows, and not to say the Red Sox are in that class, but the Red Sox, we all know, rival, it was on the road, and they were able to not win that series. So let's see how they're going to play out as the Subway Series will come into Citi Field tomorrow and Wednesday night out at Citi Field. So we'll get to see how that's going to shake down, and we'll talk about that there on Thursday's podcast. But then you have the Orioles, who left town and left their flying high, left their bats behind as well. And I'll say this for one reason. Some of those runs they should have saved and brought them over with them to their trip there to Houston, because they were down 14-3 on Friday night before scoring a run in the 7th and then 7 in the 8th to make it 14-11. And then the rest of the weekend, their bats went silent. I'm sure they were probably hoping whatever hot bats that they had left behind at Yankee Stadium, they must have left them there because they didn't hit worth a lick the rest of the series. They only scored 1 run in the final 2 games. The Astros sweep the Orioles, the first time since 2022 that the Orioles have been swept in the regular season. Now, of course, they did get swept in the postseason, as we know, to the Texas Rangers. And, of course, when the money was on the line after not getting swept all of last year, what happens? They get swept out of the postseason. But for the Orioles to now get swept, to get that off of their ledger, and to an Astro team that have been fighting their way to see if they could be relevant here in the American League, and now I'm going to segue to them, they are in the hunt. And it's weird to even say that. And I talked about this weeks ago and even as early as last week how I don't think the Astros will make it to the postseason. I mean, think about what's going on with the Astros this year. They lost 2 of their big starters, and even Framber Valdez, their ace, he had been on the shelf for quite some time, and he won the game there yesterday, or I believe Saturday. But for Valdez, who was out for a significant amount of time, then you have both Christian Javier and Jose Urquidy out for Tommy John. They're done for the year. Justin Verlander, who has neck discomfort, he's on the IL currently. You had Ronel Blanco, who threw a no-hitter there on April Fool's Day, gets suspended for 10 games for sticky stuff, and that's going to be a theme we'll talk about later on. And then you had him come back to throw 7 no-hit innings last week against Detroit. Their lineup has been in shambles. They had to get rid of Jose Abreu, who I thought was an excellent signing before last offseason. He's gone. You have guys who have not really hit this year, whether your name is Alex Bregman as well as Yordan Alvarez, but they've found a way to the tune to where they're in second place. And remember, this team was in last place at 12-24, where they were in the basement with the Angels. And now they've come all the way back. They're still a game under 500. I believe they're 37-38 at this present moment. But they are in second place. They're a half game ahead of the Texas Rangers, and we'll talk about them as well, as they're also a huge part of this story. But for the Astros to now be a game under 500, and you have to wonder whether or not they're going to be in prime position to be a part of this AL playoff picture as we get closer to July, and then obviously the All-Star break, the trade deadline, and so on. They are currently 5 in the loss and 6 games back of the Seattle Mariners. They're actually 2 games under at 38-40. And they've won 5 in a row coming off of that sweep. So maybe this is where the Astros now finally get their groove back. And let's see whether they now go full steam ahead and get themselves in the mix in the AL West, or is it going to be a scenario where they've won 5 in a row and now they're going to take 2 or 3 steps back? That remains to be seen, and we'll keep an eye on that. Speaking of keeping an eye, the Texas Rangers. Max Scherzer back in the rotation yesterday, 5 innings, threw 57 pitches, gave up 1 hit, struck out 4, walked nobody, and that has to be an excellent sign for him and for the Rangers, the defending champs who have been not out to sea just yet, but certainly on a life raft trying to get back to shore. They are 37-40, a half game behind the Astros, as I mentioned, and if they're going to get Scherzer back, and who knows when Jacob deGrom is going to be back in the rotation as well. You would think maybe toward the end of next month, considering he had Tommy John, what was it, I believe May of last year. And usually that is a 12 to 16 month process, maybe 12 to 14, depending on the recovery. But if Scherzer's going to be healthy from here on out, that's going to be a significant boost. And if they even get deGrom back, and if he's anything close to what he once was, especially when he was in a Met uniform, that is really going to be the shot in the arm, no pun intended, that the Rangers are going to need if they're going to be a part of this AL playoff picture. So a lot had transpired here over the weekend, a lot in the AL. So that brings you up to speed of what's happening there. In the National League, the Phillies and the Diamondbacks reacquainted one another. As we all know, they were the participants in the championship series last year, and we all know how that unfolded. But after the Diamondbacks won Game 1 on Friday, the Phillies took care of business. Zach Wheeler got his 9th victory. Bryce Harper hitting bombs all over the place there, especially on Saturday. And they win there yesterday, 4-1, I believe was the final, as they took 2 or 3 of the Diamondbacks. And talk about a team similar to the Texas Rangers, a World Series hangover. Well, I guess their run last year and them trying to find their footing in the National League, same deal as the Diamondbacks trying to get to 500. They're 2 games under. Forget about the the NL West, but just as far as being a wild card team. And we'll talk about the wild card teams, I would say, come this Thursday. I was going to wait till July 1st once we get to a new month, but with the sports world now starting to slow down as we're getting closer to that Sports Dead Zone Part 2, I'll talk a little bit more about the wild card on Thursday's podcast as we'll unpack that. And then you have a scenario, I have to bring them up. And I know that there's still a couple of games. Double check that. Yes, there are 2 games under 500. And I said until they get to 500, that's when I'm going to take them seriously. And the Braves give it up. I know I talked about the Yankees, but the Braves, good series. And they've actually turned their season around because remember, they had lost 5 in a row. And now they've won a couple of series, including this Yankee series. So you have to wonder whether or not they've gotten their bearings together, and maybe they could make a little bit of a push as they're just 6 in a loss behind the Phillies in the NL East, 7 behind overall. Now, as far as the Mets, think about this. Since they lost to the Dodgers when they got swept, and remember the Jorge Lopez fiasco, him throwing his glove into the stands, right before they went to play out that was before the London series. That weekend, they went on the road. I got to double check that. Because since that series, and here's my point, they are 5-0-2 in series being played. I mean, think about that, 5-0-2, where they won a series that weekend. I have to go back and check. They split against the Diamondbacks that weekend. That's what it was. They had a 10-game homestand where they lost 2 out of 3 to the Giants. They got swept by the Dodgers, and then they won the first 2 games against Arizona before losing the back 2. Since then, they swept the Nationals. They split those 2 games against the Phillies in London, and then they came back to beat the Padres. They also beat the Marlins, and then beat 2 out of 3 against Texas, and then 2 out of 3 against the Cubs over the weekend. So since they lost that series to the Dodgers, and that was the start of the Memorial Day week, they are 5-0-2 and 13 of 19 overall. Now, there's still 2 games under 500, and we'll talk about their chances in the wild card come Thursday. But now you get a big giant damp or a big giant deuce that dampens this whole, not going to say winning streak, but this series streak, if you will, where last night, up 5-2 to the Chicago Cubs, ESPN, Edwin Diaz comes in, no trumpets, of course, and before he even throws a pitch, the umpires go to him to check for any substances. They look on his hands. You can see he has some black stuff on the inside, on his index finger and middle finger, and before he can even toe the rubber, he gets ejected, meaning that he's going to be suspended for 10 games. Obviously, he's not going to be a part of the Subway Series Part 1 tomorrow and Wednesday night. And Diaz, who's had a very shaky year, as we know, him trying to get himself on track, coming off of that knee injury last year, certainly falling way far below expectations coming into this year, and now has this on his ledger that, of course, whether it's the Yankee fan or just the baseball fan, they're going to get at Diaz for being a cheater. Now, he says it was rosin. The umpires and with the pool reporters said that this is something that is more than just rosin. All right, you got to take it for what it's worth. But for Diaz, and I get it, he's trying to get a better feel. I'm sure it was hot and sticky. I didn't watch the whole game last night. Sure, it was hot and sticky there in Chicago. But for Diaz to get caught here at this juncture as the Mets trying to get themselves a little bit of a feel-good story going into the month of July, where June has been a nightmare for this team. And even though May was a nightmare, they were a month ahead of schedule. But June has actually been nice to the Mets, winning these series, as I mentioned. And now they may have to close out this month to where they have the Yankees in these two games, and hopefully they don't get embarrassed. Although the Yankees, as I mentioned, they've hit the skids here. But who knows? Maybe the panacea will be for the Mets, for them to smack around their pitching, as they had Luis Severino pitch yesterday. They avoided him pitching the Yankees. He would have pitched the game tomorrow night. That's not going to be the case. You're going to have David Peterson, I shudder, against Garrett Cole, and the two best Yankee pitchers are going to go up against the Mets this time around, as Luis Hill will try to get back on the bump and in good graces after that performance there on Friday night against the Braves. And he's going to go up against, I forgot who the pitcher was because they had to move up Peterson. It's not Tyler McGill. Let me pull that up real quick. But your matchup there for the game on Wednesday night is going to be Sean Manaea, the lefty, who's actually been pretty good, but we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there. Hopefully the Mets split and not get embarrassed here in these two games. And then they have the Astros coming in. Talk about a team that's been hot, as we mentioned. So the Astros will come to town. So that should be an interesting week for the Mets, as the Yankees and Stros will invade Citi Field. But let's see what's going to happen here with the Mets. As I talked about, it'd be nice for them to get these two games. Imagine that, to get to 500. I don't think that's going to be the case. Just get a split, and you can just go from there. That's what I have there with the baseball. Let's look at the schedule here upcoming. We know about the Mets and Yankees here in these first two games, and the rest of the week for the Yanks, as you know. But schedule-wise, a light one here on the docket today. Cleveland at Baltimore. Interesting there, as you have two teams atop. I get it that Baltimore's percentage points and has the games in hand, but still they're right at the top of the AL East. So you have Cleveland, who won, I believe, 2 out of 3 over Toronto over the weekend. Let me just double check that. The Guardians, who they actually swept the Blue Jays. So Guardians, as we all know, playing well. And let's see, as those two teams will go at it. Philly at Detroit, Seattle's at Tampa. Toronto at Boston, Atlanta at St. Louis. A lot of games that you don't really, Texas at Milwaukee. And that's just for today. For the full schedule there tomorrow, you don't really have a lot cooking there, baseball, in this early part of the week. Minnesota at Arizona, Washington, San Diego, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami at KC, Dodgers at White Sox. Brutal schedule. So your highlight pretty much could be Cleveland, Baltimore, Mets, Yankees, just for Subway Series purposes. But other than that, you don't really have much cooking there with baseball. But that will conclude the baseball segment. Now as I lace on my high tops and get on the hardwood, because we got a lot there to get into when it comes to the NBA. We know the Celtics had their parade there on Friday. And I watched a lot of the stuff online. I wasn't going to sit through that because a lot of those parades are boring to begin with. And I know Jason Tatum took a shot at the Miami Heat fans and their organization for what that's worth. But one thing that, as a Celtic fan, I was surprised and I read. So they won the championship last Monday night. And then they had a celebration in a private scenario in Miami on Tuesday before flying back Wednesday. What was that about? Why didn't they have the private scenario in Boston? I don't know, or private ceremony in Boston. That I found pretty strange, so I hope somebody's on the scoop. I'm trying to see if I can get somebody on to discuss that because even I'm intrigued for why the Celtics decided to get on a jet to go to Miami and celebrate their championship there. So for what that's worth, I don't know. But here's some news before we get to the draft on Wednesday night. The worst kept secret, JJ Redick, as we know, is now the new head coach of the Lakers. I get it. It was a guy that was on their radar to begin with, but then Danny Hurley, they decided to fly him out, his family, try to wine, dine, seduce them to be the next Laker coach, but because of their East Coast roots and maybe the offer, what was it, 6 years, $70 million, I'm sure that they probably thought, wait, you want me to be the Laker coach? I want to be paid in the stratosphere of Eric Spoelstra, Steve Kerr, maybe not the top flight as far as being the number one paid overall coach, where I believe that belongs to Greg Popovich, but they decided to refuse that offer. And then for now Redick to come in and be the guy that's going to man the sidelines for the Lakers over the next 4 years. And all I can say is this. We know that JJ Redick has it in tight with LeBron, has that podcast that they've been doing over the last couple of months. And the only thing I'm going to say to that is the influence of LeBron. Now, I don't know if Jeannie Buss, the owner, and even Rob Pelinka, the GM, was there an influence there by LeBron? A little wink, wink, nudge, nudge to get my guy on board. I get it. You want to test the waters with Danny Hurley, but he's a great basketball mind. We know the type of student of the game that JJ Redick is. Here's my guy, or here's my endorsement to bring him in. And then Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka said, all right, we're going to do that because they weren't going to go the route of Monty Williams. I know a lot of people were up in arms about that. Williams just got fired there, what was it, Wednesday? And they announced Redick, the coach, I believe Thursday, if not Friday. They weren't going to fly Monty Williams out for an interview. They pretty much knew who their guy was. And even though Williams would have been a formidable candidate, despite the fact what happened last year in Detroit and his last season in Phoenix, but they already had their guy in mind, so I'll give them a pass on that. But here's the thing. Was LeBron that much of an influence for Buss to slide that contract across the table for JJ Redick to sign? Instead of saying, well, you know what, let's see Monty Williams. Or you know what, let's pause and give it another day or two before we sign Redick to be our next head coach. Obviously, I'm not privy to those discussions, but that's one that I think about. And then the second thing is, now with LeBron's power and his influence in the locker room, is it going to be a thing where he's going to be the co-coach? Where I get it that Redick, he's going to try to impart his wisdom on the younger players of the team, the Austin Reeves of the world, I believe Rui Hachimura, he's a free agent, or other guys, and who knows what their roster is going to look like, because free agency is a week from today, come to think of it, where who knows who's going to go where and signing trades and things of that nature. But is Redick going to be the guy that's going to blow the whistle and call out the younger players where LeBron and AD are going to get a pass? And LeBron is going to be that pseudo coach? Not necessarily just on the court during a game, but even during practices, during walkthroughs, and things of that nature. And that's something that you have to think about. LeBron, for that, he just should have been the coach. And I don't think LeBron was going to take that title, considering that he has his own free agency upcoming. He has June 29th to figure out whether he wants to pass on his final deal to become a free agent, or is he going to sign for one more year? And then with the draft, which I'll get to in a second, is it going to be a situation where LeBron is going to stay in LA? And I think when the dust settles, he will stay in LA. I think it'd be a little bit of a shock if he tests the waters with free agency. And with that being said, I'm sure Jeannie Buss is going to fork over a blank check to keep LeBron there for relevance as far as the Lakers there and their brand, etc. But I'm going to say this right now. Not only is he going to stay a Laker, but I don't know how this is going to pan out here in year one. Because if it's the thing where LeBron's going to sign for 2 years, to me, he just should have been the coach. And that's not a knock on JJ Redick. That's not a knock on whatever philosophies that he may have. But let's face it, he's had these podcasts with LeBron. They're two basketball minds with high IQs meeting in the mind. You mean to tell me that in private, that they're not going to discuss the Laker blueprint or game plan for the upcoming season, and he's not going to have his fingerprints all over that? I mean, you have to be a fool to think that's not going to be the case. That Redick is going to walk in there to say, LeBron, this is my philosophy. These are my theories. You got to go by what it is that I'm going to say and how I'm going to navigate the coaching aspect of this team. So this is what it's going to be. You think LeBron's going to sign on for that? Not a chance. LeBron knows the tea leaves of the league, his team, the culture, etc. This is going to be a joint venture between the two guys. And if you think it's going to be anything but that, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. And that's all there is to it. So I'll leave it there. Again, that's not a knock on that's not a knock on Redick. That's not a knock on whatever it is that he's going to bring to the table in order to get the Lakers back to prominence there, starting off in the Western Conference, let alone the entire league. But we got to call it as we see it. His association with LeBron is a huge shadow that's literally going to be not next to him, right behind him, and maybe even in front of him for that matter, because there is no slicing and dicing that as much as Redick is going to have whatever he brings to the table, a lot of that is going to be with LeBron to decide. And there's no ifs, ands, buts, babies about that. You also had a trade which I thought was very shrewd, and give it up to Sam Presti, no shock there, the GM of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, I'm not trying to make Alex Caruso out to be Joe Dumars, but that trade for Josh Giddey, where he sends Josh Giddey to Chicago for Alex Caruso. Caruso, as we know, a good glue role player, a guy that is going to bring a defensive prowess, which, think about this, with him and Lou Dort gives you a real solid backcourt. And maybe they took a page out of what the Celtics did in their championship run by having Derek White and Drew Holiday be the stalwarts to slow down everybody in the East, and of course Luka, more so Jaylen Brown, I get it, but you did have assignments to where Drew Holiday was on Luka, and obviously with Kyrie, and thinking of what Dallas did to OKC in the conference semis, now you have Caruso, who's not afraid to take a big shot, good three-point shooter, shot 40% in the regular season, also is going to play that good defense, and on top of that, although in the bubble, did win a championship. So he has some championship DNA. He has some testicular and intestinal fortitude, is a very good defensive player, and as well as could take a big shot. That is a big boon for Oklahoma City, and a guy that is under the radar. I understand he's not a sexy guy. He's not that top flight guy, as we saw with Drew Holiday and what the Celtics did right before training camp. Understood, but for an OKC team that knows that they're going to have to pay these players when the time comes. Obviously, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is already making big bucks, but you know he's going to get a supermax somewhere down the road. Chet Holmgren, you would think, somewhere down the road. And you're going to have to keep these guys together, even with all their number one picks that they're going to have in the pipeline for years to come. I thought that was an excellent move by the GM there, and bringing in a guy like that who has pretty much all those intangibles. Can shoot, defense, and has won a championship. So great move there by the Thunder. And then the NBA draft, which now they're trying to take a page out of the NFL. We know the NFL for years. Night one is the first round. Second night, rounds 2 and 3. And then the third night is 4 through 7, or really the afternoon, from 12 noon through whatever time the NFL draft concludes. So now the NBA has day one, which will be on Wednesday. Usually the draft is on a Thursday. Draft is Wednesday, 8 o'clock, I'm sure prime time, ESPN, ABC. And then day 2 is at 4 o'clock. If it's only one more round, why not have it at 8 o'clock? To me, that's number one, because it's going to get lost at 4 o'clock. You're going to forget that it's even on. And granted, the second round, you may have a guy like Bronny James, who I didn't even talk about as far as tying in with the Lakers and the whole specter of JJ Redick as the coach, and how Bronny could be that cloud, I don't want to say dark cloud, but that cloud that's casting over the Lakers as far as the pressure of drafting him to play with LeBron, etc. And I'll talk about Bronny more in a second. But day 2 is at 4 o'clock. So by the time you get home from work, the draft is going to be over. So I didn't understand as to why. And I get it, you're not going to put it on ABC the second round, but you could put it on ESPN. There's not going to be a hockey game, a basketball game, baseball, the College World Series ends tonight. So I don't know. To me, it didn't make any sense for them to have a day 2 start at 4 o'clock, but that's just me. But this draft, for them to go the 2-day route it's a good thing, but you talk about any top flight players coming out of this draft, you're going to have to look long and hard for anybody that's going to have an impact, for anybody that's going to be of note. Now, you may have some players that could pan out in the long run. And at the top of the draft, who knows? Donovan Clingan out of UConn. I know you talk about Alexander Sarr in the past, who I thought was foregoing the draft this year. I know another French player decided to pass on declaring himself for the draft. But I see Alexander Sarr's name, 7-footer from France, who will be at the top 2 or 3, you would think. And hopefully will be the Victor Wembanyama. I know you're going to get all the comparisons there. 7 foot, he's not 7'5", I get it. But whether it's Alexander Sarr, Donovan Clingan, Zach Edey, those are going to be the guys. And who knows if Edey's going to be part of the lottery in the top 4 or 5. But this is a draft that has not a lot of depth, that does not have a lot of star power, that does not have maybe even a diamond in the rough. That's how bad this draft could be. And yes, we could talk about LeBron James. Where does he go? Is anybody going to be surprised he gets drafted in the first round? Quite possibly. But then again, you got slim pickings. I couldn't even tell you. And I have a list here. I know you have the other big man that's going to come out that could be the number 1 pick. And maybe the Atlanta Hawks, who has the number 1 draft, or have the number 1 draft, in a one, Zachary Research. I can't even pronounce his last name. You know me with last names. Risache. And he's another kid that's from France. And with Atlanta, Washington, Houston, San Antonio, who has 2 picks in this first, they have the 4th and the 8th pick. Detroit, Charlotte, Portland, Memphis, Utah, that rounds out the top 10. You're not going to have a lot of guys that you would think that it's going to be a deep draft. I mentioned Clingan, Stephon Castle from the championship there at UConn, Reed Shepard from Kentucky, as we all know, he has a lot of ability. Dalton Knecht, the big-time scorer from Tennessee. You do have a few names, but at the same time, are these guys that are going to be bona fide NBA starters, let's say year 2, year 3, or even in his first year? Maybe unlikely, even on a bad team. And are they going to be even future All-Stars? Dare I even say Hall of Famers? Generally, with a draft, we can kind of gauge whether or not a guy's going to be, oh yeah, he's going to be a 10-year vet. Or yeah, this guy's a future All-Star. Or you know what, this guy is going to be in a Hall of Fame someday. This draft, you can't really say that. There isn't a guy that you could say, that guy's going to be a Hall of Famer, or that guy's going to be a lock 8 to 10-year All-Star. You don't have that. And I understand it's way too early. We got to wait to see how their careers pan out, the organizations that they land, culture, etc. 100%. But yes, this is not the 96 draft. This is not the 2003 draft. You don't have any Allen Iversons, Kobe Bryant's, at that time, Stephon Marbury, Ray Allen, Antoine Walker, Steve Nash. In 03, you don't have LeBron, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade. You have none of those guys at the top of the draft, or you could look at it and say, boy, this is a loaded draft. This is slim pickings, people. And the good thing is we'll at least look on Thursday when we reconvene as to how that first round will unfold and get I'm not even going to say 30,000-foot view, because it's pretty much going to be a 5,000-foot view considering who's going to be coming out. We'll wait to see about Bronny. Does he fall to the second? That's going to be the question. Does he get drafted in the first round, or is he going to fall in the second round? And does he go to the Lakers? Because June 29th, which is on Saturday, and as I mentioned before, that's when LeBron can decide whether or not he wants to opt out on his deal. If he does get drafted, and I'm sure there's going to be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to Rob Pelinka coming and be like, hey, my son's there. You got to draft him. You already know. So with the draft going to take place Wednesday and Thursday, and with his impending decision on free agency, we're going to know where Bronny's going to land. So you also have that to think about. And whether or not we talk about it on Thursday, whether he gets drafted in the first round, or we're going to have to wait till Thursday's draft proceedings to see where he's going to land then, we may quite frankly find out by the weekend whether or not LeBron's going to stay in LA or not. I think he'll stay one more time, but Stranger things have happened. We shall see. Other than that, that's what I got there on the NBA front. And that'll do it. Nothing on the NFL. I know the College Baseball World Series tonight. You have the Volunteers and Aggies for the deciding game. I haven't been fully invested in that, people, so I'm not going to all of a sudden put on my College World Series hat to be like, well, hey, this is who I think is going to win. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to cheat you out of that. I don't know who's going to win. I don't know one player on the Aggies, just like I don't know a player from the Tennessee Volunteers. So I'm being real with you guys and gals. I'm sure it's going to be exciting. I've heard that the College Baseball World Series has been everything in a bag of chips. So I'll keep that in mind. Let's see if it's thrilling, if it comes down to the wire or extras or whatever. I'll report that there, whether on my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ or, of course, on the podcast come Thursday. And I know you have the Olympics next month. I know Wimbledon starts a week from today. And you have the final golf major in the middle of next month. We do have some things coming down the highway. But right now, I know WNBA, I even made a mention of that on my YouTube channel. I know you've had a lot here with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese here over the last week. The foul from last week, flagrant one, was it intentional, etc. Again, I'm not watching these games and really honing in on what's happening or taking a finger of the pulse of the WNBA. That's not because I don't want to, because I have been paying attention, but not to the point where I'm fully invested. So because of that, I'm not going to go full in on something that I haven't really watched. Now, as the season is going on, and because it's been an intriguing year, this is something I'm going to have to really keep an eye on and watch, but I'm not going to fake the funk here, people, when it comes to sports and what's happening outside of that, whether it is the Olympics or even the Copa America, the soccer, which is going on. I get that too. That's big right now. And yours truly is not on top of it. Again, not fully invested, so I'm not going to talk about it. But still, when it comes to everything else that's happening in sports, you know I got you covered. And yes, maybe I got to open up that lens a little bit further to bring on that soccer fan, the WNBA fan, etc. But that's something yours truly will work on. And you know what? As I'm declaring that right now, I got to open that aperture up a little bit more, because where else are you going to get all these different type of sports, leagues, etc., news, topics, opinions in roughly an hour? Where else are you going to get that? None other than right here. So with that being said, thank you so much, my good people, for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars, write a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, you know about the channel on YouTube at JAYREELZ. If you want to hit me up with any questions, comments, suggestions, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports since birth, with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.